Hey folks, it's Rob Flux here with another Sunday session, and tonight is open mic night, and that's your opportunity to ask me any question that you would like to help you on your property development journey. Now, in order to do that, what I ask is you click on the link below, so propdev.info/open-mic, submit your questions early, and that allows me to do whatever homework that I need to do in order to research your particular problem. Now, that said, we've got a whole bunch of questions that have already been submitted for this particular month. Now, we run these events on the first Sunday of every single month. So your opportunity to submit your questions early in order for next month's session. Now, that said, we've got a cracking show ahead of us, lots of questions in front of us. First one comes from King Shook. So King Shook says, hi, Rob, I'm assisting a client who's considering the purchase of a proposed 450 square metre corner duplex lot in Austral with a 27.5 metre frontage. Property already has a DA approval for 2 attached duplexes and is priced at 950K. Comparable duplexes as a finished product in the area are currently selling between $900,000 and $1 million each, with construction costs expected to be in the range of $350,000 to $400,000 per duplex, depending upon the level of finishes and specifications selected. So based on these figures, would you proceed with this opportunity? If so, what is the approach you recommend to maximize profitability while managing risk? Appreciate your thoughts. So King Shook, thank you very much for the question, mate. Look, there are 2 different ways that you can actually do a feasibility. So way number 1, which is the way that most people do, is what they call a bottom up. What am I purchasing the property for? In this instance, you've said 950K. What are my costs? And I add up my costs. And then at the end of that, what do I hope to achieve for the sale of finished product? And then whatever is the difference between those is the profit. And we try to get very optimistic with the sale price and very optimistic on that profit point by actually doing that particular approach. Okay. The alternative, which is what I'm going to do this time around, is the top-down approach. Let's start with the finished product. What is the finished product going to sell for? Robert Kiyosaki has in the book Rich Dad Poor Dad has rule number 1. Pay yourself first. So I'm going to subtract the profits that I need to make from the deal in order to ensure that the bank is actually going to lend me the money and ensure that this is a deal that I actually want to do. So if I subtract the profit here, so in this particular instance, you're talking about selling between 900K and $1 million each. So I'm just going to say 950 each, just for round numbers, somewhere right in the middle. That's going to generate $1.9 million for your GRV, gross realized value. The first thing we want to do is pay ourselves. If we're trying to pay ourselves a 20% profit on cost, we'd be subtracting $380,000 from that number. From there, we now start subtracting the costs in the project, and whatever is left over is then the purchase price that we should be buying the property for. Now, when I do this approach, if I subtract the 380,000 from the 1.9 million, that very quickly gives me 1.520. Okay, so which means that I've got to do the entire deal within that 1.520 mark. Now, even before I start subtracting, I'm going to have GST on sales, I'm going to have agent's commission, I'm going to have holding costs and rates and land tax and all that sort of thing. Even before I get to all of that, I'm just going to subtract the costs that we know that are sitting there. So we know that there's going to be $900,000 worth of construction. So I subtract that from the 1,520, and now we've got $620,000 left over. So I need to have purchased the property plus all my stamp duties and land tax and rates and that sort of thing. So I'm already below the 950 asking price, and all I've done is subtract one cost from the deal. So in this particular instance, this is no deal. As a matter of fact, they would have to give me this particular property for me to be interested in that based on the resale prices that you're actually achieving in the area. Otherwise, you're just not going to get the margins that you're needing to do to make that deal particularly successful. So my strong encouragement is to actually assess the site 2 different ways: your bottom-up approach and your top-down approach. Top-down approach means you can look at more sites very, very fast. Just subtract the big numbers, and then if it doesn't even make sense subtracting the big numbers, then why are we wasting time on that particular deal? So in this instance, mate, that is a no deal type scenario, but thank you for playing. Thanks, King Shook. Okay, next question comes from Adam. Adam's got a couple of questions. So question number 1 says, you've spoken extensively about the importance of feasibility studies before purchasing a development site. In your view, what are the key components every property developer should include in a feasibility model? And are there any free or low cost tools that you would recommend for beginners to accurately assess projects' viability, risks, and profit margins? So, Adam, this is a fantastic question, mate. And I guess there's multiple parts to the answer. So, the first part that I would actually say is that a lot of people are looking for the software tool, the feasibility software, to do all the work for you. Um, the reality is you don't need a fancy tool. We have a tool. We have one called QuickViso, and if you go to our website and look up QuickViso, and I've probably got a link for that here somewhere that I can quickly pop up. So here's the QuickViso link. This tool is a feasibility, I guess, spreadsheet that's actually going to help you to actually identify how to actually run the deal, and it uses my three-stage process of your quick and dirty 10-minute check, then your detailed 2-hour check, and then a detailed due diligence check to basically go, what is the minimum amount of effort that I can put into analyzing the deal before throwing it away? Okay, because we don't want to have to look at every single line item for absolutely everything. And you just saw the example with Kingshook just a couple of moments ago, where I can quickly rule out deals in literally minutes just by doing, I guess, the obvious things. Okay, now feasibility, I guess, despite the fancy software, and I think QuickViso is a great piece of kit. It really comes down to fundamentally two things. Okay, so number one, sales research. What should I be buying it for? What should I be selling it for? Okay, so those inputs are super important, and the tools that you're going to use for that are a sales research tool and a a sales research tool. Then the next thing would, so you might be doing RP data, you might be doing price finder, and we're helping, I guess, build a product right now, which we'll be announcing to the market very, very soon. So watch this space on that one. And they are going to give you those sales research tools. Then the next thing you need is the development research tool. So development research tool, you've got tools like ArchiStar, Land Checker, Stash, and again, the tool that we're building, where we can actually build both the sales research and the development research into the same tool. And when you start to do that, what we're looking for here are the problems. What is the problem on the site? Because if you don't see the problem is always there. But for every problem, there is a cost in order to solve the problem. So what you're really wanting to do is identify every single problem on the site. So where's the driveway going to go? Do I need to install a footpath? Is the fire hydrant in the right location? Is there a street tree that needs to be removed? Will council allow that to happen? If they do, what's the cost they're going to do for us? Is it going to be underground or above ground power? When we start to look at how deep are our services, are the services even installed? Are they in the neighbour's yard? When we start to identify all the problems and actually list them down, every single one of them should have a line item. Okay. Now, if you don't identify the problem, your feasibility doesn't capture the issue, doesn't capture the cost, and your feasibility looks fantastic. But when you run the deal, then the deal is clearly still going to encounter the problem, and that's going to blow out your costs at the tail end. And I think a lot of people think that the spreadsheet does the work, but in reality, your site analysis does the work. Okay. If you do your site analysis really, really well, okay, and identify every single problem, then you should have a line item for each problem on your spreadsheet, and only then can you determine whether or not your feasibility is a good one. Because as they say, garbage in, garbage out. You can have a fancy tool, and if you don't put all the right inputs in, then you're not going to get an accurate answer at the tail end. So you can use QuickViso. I guess we highly recommend that in order to, I guess, help you prompting how to do that. It follows our three-stage process: the 10-minute quick and dirty check, a 2-hour detailed check where we're, I guess, identifying even more problems, I guess, on the site, and then a full detailed due diligence assessment where we've preloaded in well over 300, I guess, checklist items for you to actually look at. But even then, that's not enough because every single site has its own unique opportunities and challenges. And so that spreadsheet tries to capture as much of that as humanly possible. But again, using that throw it away type approach, the faster you can throw it away, the more sites you can actually look at. So Go check out Quick Viso, mate. Okay, that was question number one. Adam also has a second question. He says, you've previously discussed the need for the industry to adopt modern methods of construction, or MMC, to address labour shortages and increasing construction demand. However, with the major infrastructure projects, Olympic-related works, a rapid expansion of AI data centres, all competing for the same skilled tradies, particularly electricians, HVAC technicians, plumbers, and other essential services, how do you see developers overcoming these labour constraints over the next 5 to 10 years? Do you believe MMC alone is enough, or are there other strategies in the industry should be considering? Adam, this is a cracking question, mate. Look, the reality is that our traditional building methods of a stick build, where we take a piece of wood and we chop it up and we build a house out of that, those days are very, very much dwindling. And it's going to be very, very soon that that builders have to pivot over to these modern methods of construction approaches, or they just will not have the labour in order to execute the deals. Okay, so we're going to start to move to a world where more is produced inside a controlled environment in a factory, brought to site, and then assembled. Firstly, more efficiencies in doing the process. So the same electrician that's on site and the same the same plumber and the same chippy, you take them inside a factory environment, the same guy can be nearly twice as productive. So firstly, he doesn't have to drive to site. Okay, he drives to work, right? When he gets to site, he doesn't need to spend 45 minutes unloading his toolbox at the start of the day. He doesn't need to spend 45 minutes loading it up at the end of the day. During the day, if he runs out of materials, he doesn't have to whip out to Bunnings, because in the corner of the shed, they've got all the tools on the shelf. They've got all the fixtures and fittings and that sort of thing that we're actually going to be using sitting in little bins that they're doing stock control on every single day, and somebody's responsible for doing the stock order management control and that sort of thing. So they basically just, when they get to work, they can be productive right out of the gate. The next thing is you don't have to worry about weather conditions. So in the blazing sun, they're inside a nice shed. In the pouring rain, they're inside a nice shed. So from a controlled environment perspective, now they can actually be more productive just from a pure relocating them inside that controlled environment. Okay. The next thing is accuracy. So now they're not having to, I guess, do hand cuts on site, but rather they can be doing precision laser measurements. So accuracy within 2 millimeters on all of your cuts and joints and that sort of thing. Okay, then you've got other efficiencies like, well, instead of throwing all of the timber waste into the skip bin, now all the timber waste can go into a recycle pile, and that can actually then be repurposed on many, many other projects. So a piece of timber from this site, this project, can actually be repurposed as a noggin on the next site, for example, or the next part of the build. So there's a lot of repurposing of materials now. And so the wastage drops down to less than 2% in most instances. And when we start to add all of these things up, you're starting to get a higher quality product because it's coming from a controlled environment that then is taken to site and assembled by the builder. The builder is now able to do more homes in less time. So depending upon the kind of technology that you use, and there's multiple different MMC approaches, there's volumetric, there's panelized, there's kit of parts, and there's 3D printing. Depending upon which particular approach you go, you could be assembling on site for 1 day, maybe 2 days, and you've got an entire home using something like a volumetric approach. You could, if you use a panelized approach, you could be having it watertight in 2 or 3 days with the shell of the home, and then have to fit out the inside of that over the next 2 to 3 weeks. But you might have a complete home in as little as 4 weeks. Okay. And so when we start to look at these, what we're looking at is the throughput that's actually happening means that a builder, instead of taking 12 months to build a single home, if he can build that in a single month, now he can build 12 homes in a year. Now that is, so firstly, the tradie that he was using going into a factory means that he can produce twice as much in the same timeline. And the builder, when he's on site, can now do 12 times as much throughput all the way through, it becomes a win-win-win. And so from a developer's perspective, we're having massively reduced holding costs because we're not having to worry about holding the project for 12 months, but rather we can actually get in and out of the deal in literally months. And so everybody has a win here. The builder hasn't got the risk of his fixed price contract. I guess when he's priced something at the start of the year, by the time the materials need to happen at the end of the year, the cost of everything has actually gone up, but rather he's pricing it and he's buying the materials straight away and he's installing that straight away. And so everything now becomes a lot more controlled. So the risk for the builder disappears. So their risk has gone down, their throughput has gone up, their profitability will go up. The industry is going to need to do this. Okay. Now, the irony is it's called a modern methods of construction, but it's actually not that modern. Okay, prefabrication in many forms has been around for thousands and thousands of years, but Europe has been using this extraordinarily heavily for the last 40 years. It's just new to Australia, so none of these technologies are new. They're just not widely adopted here in Australia. So it's going to take a little while for us to actually pivot to actually be using this. But places like Sweden, for example, 80% of all of their construction is using some form of what we're calling MMC, but prefabricated, manufactured in a factory and assembled on site type technologies. So do I see this as the savior? Absolutely. This is what we need to actually move forward. Now, in order to do that, there's a couple of challenges that we need to overcome. So firstly, the builder cannot build a prefab building unless we have designed it to be prefabable. Okay, so what is called DFMA, designed for modular assembly. So you as a developer must ask your architect, can you please design for modern methods of construction, designed for modular assembly. Okay, when you do that design, it doesn't mean the builder has to use prefab. What it means is the builder has a choice. They can use a traditional method or they can use the prefab type approach. Now, by having that choice, they are now going to be taking that out to all the factories and saying, hey, can you price this up? And they're going to be making a judgment decision on the best approach to actually do that. Now, for a small period of time, the builders are going to have to learn, I guess, the different approaches, the different assembly techniques, and become comfortable with that. So there's going to be a transition period where convincing your architect to design for modular assembly is your first challenge. But without that design, builder has no choice. Then the next thing is the builder themselves has to go through a learning curve to go, hey, I need a customer who's understanding that I have to do my first prefab project and I have to learn on the job. So I need a client who is willing to let me go on that journey. Now, once they've done that, they start to realize how efficient, how effective this is, and how beneficial this is for their actual business. That's when it's going to start to become starting to be widely adopted. Now, I get lots and lots of questions around this with regards to, hey, what about this building certifiers or the building surveyors, depending upon the state that you're in, and inspection certificates and all that sort of thing. All of those things are still needed, but the question is, where do they go to do the inspection? Are they going to site to do the inspection, or are they going to the factory to do the inspection? Now, when they're going to a factory the first time, they themselves have to go through a learning curve. Hey, what is this new approach that's actually happening? How is it done? How's it documented? And what you'll find is the majority of factories have what they call a digital twin. So they have, I guess, the paper-based version of the drawing. Then they have the physical drawing, and what they do is they trace every element. So what is the piece of timber? How has it been assembled? All the nails that actually went into that. How has it been attached? And they take documented physical evidence of every single one of them to the point where they QR code and scan every single one of these elements to say, well, I can actually look up, if there's a fault in this at some point in the future, I can actually look up that particular part number and I know exactly how this particular wall was assembled. And so they can reverse engineer any particular problems when they're out in the site just by scanning a QR code on that, and they know exactly what the elements were that actually went into that particular build. So you're actually going to get much higher quality control on these particular products once we start to become familiar with it. Now, as the surveyors and inspectors actually go out and actually look at these factories, they're going to start to see, hey, every single one of these are following the same design principles. So when this is actually being built, I can see exactly how far apart the nails are, what the attachment techniques are, how they actually bring the systems together. So the first time an inspector goes to site, they're going to be uh, very much inspecting the process as well as the individual element. And once they come up to speed with this, they'll become more and more familiar with it. They go, right, for this particular factory, I know exactly how they install it. So all I need to do is some random spot checks because I know they're taking photos of absolutely everything already. They're building it to a particular standard. All I need to do is make sure that they actually built to the standard. So it's actually going to become easier and easier and easier over time as we slowly bring everyone up to speed. Now, everyone's got to do a learning curve. So I think that we are at the cusp of, in the next 2 years, everyone pivoting. I'm going to say about 80% of our construction, well, I'll say 50% of our construction in 2 years will be using some form of prefab. And within 5 years, about 80%. Okay, we're going to be very, very fast approaching what they do in Sweden. We're going to have a huge pivot in Australia because we have no choice. We're running out of builders, we're running out of tradies, and it is the antidote to everything that we're actually doing. So I strongly believe in this. We're doing a whole bunch of work in this particular space that we are trying to document for you guys on our YouTube channels to actually see what's actually happening. Some projects that I personally am running myself. We're working with some providers that we intend to bring to yourselves with regards to how do you guys actually benefit from the learnings that we've actually done along the way. And the whole idea is that we grow together as a community, including discount purchasing power of how do we actually do this on scale. Okay, so now I've covered this a couple of times in the past, but the challenge that we've got is that at the moment, every single one of us are doing absolutely 100% customized, unique designs. And that can absolutely be built in a factory, but it comes at a cost, okay? Because when you're tooling up for a single project, in a factory, it takes time for them to actually bring that up to speed. But when we're actually starting to do repetition, so we're doing the same thing again and again and again, then the efficiency can come into the building process. And so we're going to start to help you guys to actually build some pattern book designs that you'll be able to buy off the shelf. And that has already been engineered correctly so that actually you have some speed to market. And we're going to encourage you guys to start to standardize on standard bathroom sizes, standard window sizes, standard all sorts of things like that. And the more that we can actually start to standardize and use the kit of parts methodologies means that we can actually get a lot of these parts that you actually need rather than custom making them every single time. We go, well, we're going to use some standard ones. The factories can actually have them pre-built and sitting on the shelf. So when we go to order them, they can just deliver them because they're taking them off the shelf. And when we start to combine all these together, we're going to start to compress our construction timelines. We're going to start to compress our costs and the variabilities and all those sorts of things. But we're still going to have the customization that we need. So every single property, if you think that the prefab element is really the shell of the home. Now, what you put inside the shell, the fixtures and the fittings and that sort of thing, you can do that at a very budget level. You can do that at a very, very expensive level. Okay. And so you can have a very similar shell that goes into a low socioeconomic area with very cheap fit out, and the same shell go into a very high socioeconomic area with a very expensive fit out. They're going to have a completely different look and feel, even though that a lot of the elements of the floor plan are very, very similar. Now, to give you an example, I'm doing a project at the moment, 18 townhouses, 5 floor plates, but 85% of all of those floor plates are using elements that are exactly the same. So we've got very similar kitchen designs, very similar bathroom designs, the stairwells are all the same. We are using a lot of elements, the kit of parts, meaning that I can actually put them together like Lego bricks. 85% of that is the same, which means that in a factory, it is so simple for them to tool up and actually just go, I can burn all of this out. And then it's only the 15% that's variation that we need to worry about potentially as an on-site install, potentially doing that in the factory as a one-off production run, all sorts of different ways of actually dealing with that. but the bulk of that we're actually able to do very efficiently and very effectively. And that's where the economies of scale start to come in. So over time, in the next couple of months, we're going to be making some pretty big announcements with regards to some key suppliers that we're actually putting in place for you guys. And we're going to start to bring you the methodologies to say, how do you start to leverage this? So watch this space, folks. And Adam, fantastic question, mate. Hope you got plenty from that. Next one comes from Andrew. Andrew says, given the volatility in the market, what premium would you pay, i.e. above market rates, for absolute certainty of the project budget and program of works? I ask this in relation to alternative delivery technologies, such as volumetric modular, where the cost might be slightly higher, but budgets and programs are much more controlled. So, Andrew, you've got a very fantastic question here. And look, traditionally, we've been looking for a 20% profit on cost on all of our projects, okay? But I guess the assumption here is that our projects are going to take 2 years to run. So when we start to look at that and we annualize that, that's approximately a 10% annualized return. So when we're starting to compress our timelines and we're no longer taking 2 years to run, then absolutely there is going to be some opportunity to say, I no longer need my 20% anymore, but rather I'm going to be happy with something that is better than that 10% return. Now, under no means am I saying, hey, we want to shrink down to 10%. But what I'm saying is, I could actually run 2 of these projects at a 10% margin with the same amount of profit in that same timeline. And so there are going to be many of us who actually go, you know what, I'm actually happy with a 15% return, or I'm happy with a 12% return. And as we start to get that control and the speed and the efficiency and the reduction in holding costs and all that, those sorts of things, I actually think it's going to go up. But where I think is a better variation of your question, mate, is the reduction in time is actually going to not reduce the construction cost per se, but rather it's going to reduce the holding costs. Now, as an example, the project that I'm actually looking at with the reduction in holding costs that we've got on our project, we're well in excess of $650,000 of savings in holding costs just in interest rates alone. Okay, so because our program of work is going to be that much shorter. So that's 650 that we've added to our profitability. And so if our construction cost was a little bit higher, it's absorbed in those savings. And so I think that's going to be the more realistic outcome, mate, is to say, well, look, we've got to be less concerned about the cost of construction and more concerned about the costs of the project overall, because swings and roundabouts, one will go up and one will come down and they will offset each other. And so I think that there's plenty of room still with a slight increase in construction costs and that reduction in the holding costs. I think the swings and roundabouts are still going to be in our favor to try and keep us in that vicinity of that 20% margin that we're always looking for anyway. But I think some people will be comfortable with that certainty once they've got some patterns that they're familiar with, some builders that are familiar with the processes, I guess some factories that are able to cookie cutter these designs out as quick as humanly possible. And I think when we start to do that, I think there will be absolutely people who are willing to, churn more projects with more certainty, and they'd be willing to take a little bit of a haircut on that, knowing that they can turn over so many. So I think that is probably in the next 2 to 3 years, I think you're going to see some people pivoting to those skinnier margins, but more volume. And it's the old McDonald's hamburger model, 50 cents a hamburger, but do a lot of hamburgers and you'll make much more money. So good question, Andrew. Thank you. Next one comes from Harry. Harry says, I'm looking to start my development journey, looking to mingle with a network in order to network and find a team. So how do I do that? Well, best way, mate, is we run physical events all the way around the country. So we run them in 5 states: Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, and Perth. You can actually hang out every single month with people. We're going to always have a town planner. We're always have an industry expert every month. So town planners, civil engineers, architects, that sort of thing, trying to help you on your property journey. And we also have members of our community sharing real deals. So the good, the bad, and the ugly of a project, for you to actually learn how those things are actually working for you. I would be coming to one of those. Not sure where you are, but if we look at the cadence of these, we have Melbourne the first Saturday of every month. We have Sydney the second Saturday of every month. We have Brisbane the third Saturday of the month. And on the fourth Saturday, we have both Adelaide and Perth happening on the fourth Saturday of every month. So that's the cadence wherever you are. But equally, every single one of these is live streamed. So no matter where you're located in the country, you could be sitting in Brisbane and watching a Perth event, or you could be sitting in Adelaide watching a Melbourne event, for example. 55 events of these a year, mate. I would be absolutely hanging around with us as much as you can. Mingle with people that have already done it. They're going to tell you how they learnt the process, what education programs that went out there, or mentors and things like that. I guess you're going to see lessons from real people doing real things. So very, very worthwhile. The other thing that I'd highly recommend if you're brand spanking new to this, we have a free course. It's called the 7-Step Formula to Financial Freedom. I'd highly recommend you actually taking a look at that. And if there is any interest at all, we also have a 12-month education mentoring program that is well worthwhile. It's called Property Development Formula. Check that out. And if there's any interest at all, click on the link, book a time. We can have a chat as to whether or not that's a right fit for you. So hoping that helps, Andrew. So next one comes from Tony. Oh, sorry, that was Harry with that question. Sorry, my mistake. Next one comes from Tony. So Tony says, what makes a deal viable? Is the price a stronger consideration than the terms? If you had a project that was overpriced for what it could achieve right now, but the terms over time allowed the project to grow into the right price, what would make the deal? That is a fantastic question, Tony. So, and it's one that a lot of people do not really understand or appreciate the most. Okay, so there are a number of different elements that make a deal come into range. Okay, so time, we've all heard the expression that time is money. So if you delay the actual settlement process, then there's a whole bunch of savings in holding costs that would actually occur. So if we just did an example, simple math, $1 million project, right? I buy it for $1 million, and the project's going to take 12 months to run. Okay, then if I settle today, I'd have to come up with a deposit today. I'd have to do the stamp duty today. I'd have to pay interest for the full 12 months. I'd have to pay rates for the full 12 months. I'd have to pay land tax for the full 12 months. Now, all of those costs, I would have to cash flow today. If, however, I got terms, and there's lots of different terms that would allow this to do this. So you could do a delayed settlement with early access, so the ability to actually come onto site and actually start construction works. You could do an option contract. You could do, a joint venture with the landowner where they are contributing the land as their component into it. All of these means that you don't have those holding costs. And so that is 12 months of interest that you don't occur. So that's 6.5% interest rate. That's $65,000 that you would have given to one of the banks. Now you can give to the vendor. So then now, instead of giving them $1 million today, I can give them $1,065,000. There's probably 15,000 in land tax. So now I can give them $1,075,000. There's probably 10K in council rates, for example. So that's now $1,085,000. Now, as we start to look at all the holding costs, it's very, very quick. Rather than giving it to the Office of State Revenue, giving it to the bank, giving it to, council, we're just going to say to the vendor, I'll give this price to you later in the process, and my profitability hasn't changed. I'm going to calculate what my actual holding costs were and give it to them at the back end. Now, straight away, that means that I'm very, very fast approaching a 10% uplift in the price of the property just by getting that 12-month delay. So yes, it is possible to pay more for the project and still be profitable. Now, all of these things are just time. Then there's risk. Okay, if they're sharing the risk of the deal, perhaps they're contributing their property into the deal. If they're sharing the risk, they should also share the reward. That's another way of giving them, I guess, an uplift in their price point that they're actually trying to achieve. Now, you only know what these are by actually understanding the needs of the vendor and the desired outcomes and goals and that sort of thing. You want to work with them. And we call these the 7 low and no money down, I guess, opportunities. So 7 different ways to negotiate these things depending upon the needs of the vendor, the time they're actually giving you, and a whole bunch of other things. Um, so we will shortly be releasing a no and low money down course to actually help you to actually navigate, well, what are these savings and how do we actually calculate them and how do we negotiate a good outcome where I can actually pay more and be just as profitable, okay? And that's the key to it. So in short, to answer your question, Harry, yes, Tony, I should say, terms are way more important than price. I'm more than happy to pay more for a property if I've got the terms to justify it. Now, I would give you a very simple, I guess, catchphrase to actually try and stick in your arsenal. It is their price on your terms or their terms on your price. Okay. So if they are dictating it must be fast, it must be unconditional, then you have to incur the holding costs and you have to incur the risk. So you get to dictate the price. Okay. But if they're dictating the price and you go, well, I can achieve that price, but these are the terms I need to get there, then that's their price, your terms, or their terms, your price. Okay, so hope that helps to nut that out, and watch out for our no and low money down course that'll be released in the not too distant future. It's going to be an absolute cracker. I've been working on this for well over 3 years. And we're taking people through a pilot program of that right now before we actually release that out to the open market. So next question comes from Offer. Offer says, I guess looking to, I guess, do a development in southeast Queensland with a property worth 4 million for a development project with no development approval and 12 months delayed settlement. What would be the standard non-refundable deposit? Well, Offer, here's the thing, mate. There is no standard. The standard comes down to what you're able to negotiate and your ability to negotiate. It also comes down to the needs of the vendor at that particular point in time. So some people need absolute certainty and they need their cash now because they may have already, in their mind, already spent the money on the next site. So let's, for example, say that they've already bought the next property, then they need cash today, they need certainty today, and so they might be willing to sacrifice price in order to get that certainty and the ability to move on to the next deal. Okay. If, however, they have not yet purchased the next property, perhaps they've been looking for that property for a long period of time and haven't been able to find it, they may need time to then go and find the next one. And they actually want the knowledge of how much money they've got potentially coming to them so they can shop for the future product, in which case time is actually on their side and you can actually use that time to your advantage. Now, equally, if they can't find the property that they're looking for, is there an opportunity for you to say, that's the product I'm actually building? Perhaps I could customize that for you. And if I can customize that for you, perhaps rather than me selling it to you and you selling it to me and me paying stamp duty and holding costs, and then me selling it back to you and you paying stamp duty again, all of those costs, why don't we leave it in your name for a period of time because you bought it 20 years ago and your holding costs are close to nothing, whereas my holding costs would be at today's market rate. That doesn't make sense. All those stamp duty transactions, that's a little bit silly. Why don't we come up with a creative solution where we're deferring all that to later in the process, and I just give you a much better home for the privilege of you delaying how long you wait for the money to actually come in. So lots of different ways, and again, that's part of our 7 no and low money down methodologies. So again, watch that space for that particular one coming through. Next one says, from Veronica, says, I'm getting market ready. I need a lawyer recommend for trusts and companies. Okay. I'm in Sydney, not that the location is critical, but what is important is clear explanations and given really sound advice with regards to planning, structures, and various deals. Now, Veronica, rather than me give you a specific recommendation here, uh, it's probably more appropriate for me to actually go, what are the things you're looking for in a lawyer? Okay. Because all the lawyers are going to tell you that they're actually going to give you good structuring advice. But the challenge is that we tend to go in and ask the wrong question. And when we ask the wrong question, we get a good answer based on the question we gave, but it probably wasn't the right answer because we didn't ask the right question. Okay. Now, typically we go in and just say, I want a structure in order to do my development. What should I do? Okay. Whereas that the solicitor doesn't know what you're actually trying to achieve in the longer run. So you've got a short-term objective and you've got a running the deal objective, and then you've got a, hey, what am I going to do next objective? You need to map all of that out for your solicitor. Okay. So firstly, are you going to have enough cash to actually do this all by yourself? Do you need some form of money partner, some form of joint venture partner? How are you actually going to enter the deal? Okay. How do you settle the deal? Is it going to be residential lending? Is it going to be commercial lending? How are you going to get to the construction phase? Again, is it residential or is it commercial construction phase? And are you going to require additional capital to actually come into your deal at that point in time? How do you intend to exit the deal? Are you keeping all of them? Are you selling all of them? Are you selling some and keeping some? Map all of that out. And then at the end of that, you want to then say, once I've got the cash, what would I like to do with it next? When you map out your entire journey and then you give that to the solicitor, you're going to get a very, very different outcome to what you're going to get if you just go, hey, I'm doing a development. What do you reckon? Okay. Now, there's a whole bunch of fantastic solicitors, but what I would say is there are going to be some solicitors that are fantastic for just your structuring. There are going to be some solicitors that are great for just your joint ventures. There are going to be some solicitors going to be fantastic for your construction loans, and that's what they specialize in. And so there are some times where you can get one solicitor that has just one niche, and he is the absolute best in that one niche. And there are other times when I have an organization that is big enough that they've got one specialist in the construction loan and one specialist in the joint ventures and other specialists. So you might be dealing with a larger company that has many, many, many specialist resources. Okay. So there's no one answer here that actually fits. And rather than me naming somebody and assuming that that's the perfect thing that you actually need, what I'd highly recommend is come to one of our monthly events. We just kind of touched on these before. We have a thing called a masterminding process where you can bring your problem to the community and say, look, this is what I'm trying to achieve. All those things that you mapped out. Has anyone dealt with a solicitor who's been able to deal with those particular criteria that I've got happening in my world right now? And then you get a much more tailored response to go, this is my problem. This is now the specialist that I'm actually looking for. Now, at the moment, I don't understand your problem enough. You're just saying that you want some entities, but what are those entities intending to do? What are you intending to do? What's your projects? What's your deal pipeline? All of that sort of stuff. Super important that to actually paint the bigger picture. So, hoping that helps, Veronica. Next one is Sylvia. Sylvia says, I'm looking to develop 6 3-bedroom townhouses in Brisbane inner city. I've got 75% of senior debt already underway. I'm looking into the remaining 25% as equity funding, of which I will be contributing 12.5% myself. But what are the ways to fund the remaining 12.5% equity that I need in order to do the deal? So this is a fantastic question, Sylvia, and it's a very common one. There's a thing called the capital stack. And what you're looking for, you have a shortfall of equity, you're looking for what is called a preferred equity investor, okay, or preferred equity loan. It's also sometimes called a pref equity. Now, if you think of the capital stack, you've got, I guess, at the bottom of the stack, you've got your senior lender. They have a first mortgage, okay? So they are going to be the most secure and if something goes horribly wrong and they have to sell the property, because their first mortgage, they get paid first. Okay. Then next up the stack is then, in your particular instance, your preferred equity provider. So they would likely to have a second mortgage. And then after that is then your equity. And then after that is the potential profit in the deal. So if the project loses profit, then you get eroded first. Then the pref equity person gets eroded next. And then lastly, I guess the senior debt gets eroded last. So the lower down the stack you are, the more secure you are, the cheaper your loans are going to be. As you get higher and higher and higher, the closer you get to the profit, the higher the risk of that particular person. Okay. Now, there are specialist lenders who do what is called a pref equity loan. Now, they are typically not your banks. They're usually non-bank lenders. Often they're family offices, or I guess private investors, high net worth individuals, or they might be investors that you actually find yourself, through your own network and relationships and things like that. Now, depending upon how much money you're raising, and I guess how far a reach that you need to do in order to get this, then there are some ASIC regulations, the Australian Security Investment Commission. So ASIC regulations that say you may actually need what is called an Australian Financial Services License, AFSL license, if you're intending to go out to the wide community and broadcast and market to say, hey, I'm actually seeking investors. If you're wanting to advertise, for example. But if you've got a close-knit circle of high net worth individuals or potential investors that are actually going to invest in you, then the ASIC also has a thing called the 2012-2 rule, which gives you some ability as a one-off transaction to go out to friends and family and close people that you know on a personal level to personally invite them into your deal. Now, there are some limitations in that. It's called the 2012-2 rule. So no more than 20 people. And they must be personally known to you by a private invitation. Okay. So if you know those 20 people, you can say, hey, would you like to invest in my deal? Now, whether they invest in your deal or not, if you've asked them, that is now one person that has been invited. That is now, 19 people left to go. Okay. So 20 in 12 months. So within a 12-month period, you can raise no more than $2 million. Okay. Now, this is intended to be used as a one-off. This is not intended to be used project after project after project. Okay, so be very, very careful that you're not trying to go too far and too wide in your seeking of money too often. Okay, because otherwise ASIC can deem that you're actually raising. They may dictate that you actually need to have an AFSL license anyway. No matter what your approach, my strong recommendation would be, firstly, go seek a commercial broker who specializes in development lending and ask them, do they have a pref equity lender that would be interested in your particular deal? Okay, now if that's the case, then you don't need the 2012-2 rule and you don't need the AFSL, okay? And because you're just going to a single individual, I guess, high net worth or sophisticated investor to actually invest in your deal. If you can't find that particular person and you need to go out to the wider market, then my strong recommendation is to actually seek some legal advice on how do I do that? Do I qualify under the 2012-2 rule because of the amount of money that I'm trying to raise and the fact that I've actually got some people I'd like to go to? Or alternatively, do I need to actually get myself an Australian Financial Services license, in which case that would then allow me to market and advertise to say, hey, who would actually like to invest in my particular deal? So hoping all of that helps, Sylvia. Okay, coming close to the end now, folks. Steve says, I've got a fire hydrant location in a driveway. I'm considering purchasing a property with large land size with the potential to develop in the future, building 2 homes side by side. However, I've noticed that there's a fire hydrant located on the nature strip exactly where I'd plan to place the driveway. Can a driveway still be built in this location, or will the hydrant need to be relocated? How would you cost this? Okay, the auction is this Saturday, so it appreciates any insights or advice. So firstly, Steve, before going into, I guess, an auction unconditional, you want to be making sure that you've actually gone and spoken to your local civil engineer in this particular instance, and ruled out everything else that you've got. Firstly, but the most likely thing is you will need to relocate the fire hydrant. It's not an overly expensive thing to do typically, and so it shouldn't materially impact the project. But depending upon how far you need to relocate it, it could be a couple of $1,000 all the way up to say $10,000 to actually relocate it. So it typically shouldn't be a deal breaker, and is typically something that is able to be managed relatively well. Typically, you're going to find that a fire hydrant is not allowed to be trafficable. So that is, they don't want the weight of cars going over the top of it. But it's not impossible to do that. You'll notice that there are fire hydrants in the middle of the road that cars drive over all the time. So I guess there's no technical reason why that can't be in a driveway as well. So from a technical perspective, can it be done? The answer is yes. But will your particular, I guess, water authority allow that to happen? So some water authorities will allow it to be trafficable in your driveway. Others won't. Now, whether it's allowed to be trafficable or not, right now it's not trafficable. So you are either going to have to upgrade the existing one in situation in order to make it trafficable, or alternatively, you're going to have to pay to relocate that so that it doesn't need to be trafficable. Either way, I'm going to say somewhere between $2,000 and $10,000 would be, I guess, the two extremes of what your price point would be in order to do that. But I would highly recommend you actually speak to your civil engineer to actually go, okay, is it at the low end or at the high end? Or how does my particular authority deal with this particular situation? Will they actually allow it to stay in place? All those sorts of things. But look, if it was me personally, I would budget for the fact that you have to relocate it, and then do everything humanly possible to see if I don't have to, okay, and just keep it in the driveway if that is actually appropriate. So hoping that helps. Now, I think that is the last question, folks. So that's a wrap for today. Now, again, if you're wanting to actually submit your questions for next month, propdev.info/open-mic, and we will do whatever research we need to do to actually help you for your, I guess, progress your development journey. Otherwise, why don't we see you at one of our upcoming events? We run these all the way around the country: Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, and Perth. Not only can you turn up physically, but also you can live stream them from no matter where you are. So looking forward to actually seeing you at one of those moving forward. So till next time, folks, until I see you at one of those events, I'm going to say bye for now. Bye.